So to begin, we'll just basically go with initially what would be initial reactions or questions, whether it be about characters, plot, you can even go thematic things that we're looking at this point. I think today is going to kind of be overview, hopefully clear people's minds so you understand what's going on, get you out of any kind of fog that you might have until we can start reviewing. Tomorrow will probably be more of the analytical, all right, let's look thematically what's going on. What are, not that everything's going to be rhetorical analysis, but your TWA, Jackson, you were asking about, is going to be rhetorical analysis based. We'll start mentioning what are some devices that you're kind of starting to see and things like that that we can take a look at. But today's going to kind of bounce around all over the place, and we'll narrow it down tomorrow.
So like, what happened? I don't know if this specific part was when he like doesn't take the medicine and he sees a lot of stuff going on and the guy gets pulled outside the transport and something. But I was just confused with that.
Okay, you're talking about like where all the machinery imagery really starts to kind of happen. Yeah. All right. So first of all, we got Chief. And we'll get to your response. We'll just kind of do quick little background stuff about him that'll lead into it. What do we know about Chief? Like whether it be as what other folks say about him or what he says about himself so far as narrator, little details, things like that.
He's been there the longest, and then the other patients believe his death is not.
Which is really hard to do. I've never tried it, but imagine just try one day where you don't talk and you have to pretend that you don't hear anything. So number one, if you're thinking something, you can't talk. And if you hear any real loud noises, Matt just looked at me, he couldn't do that because that would mean that he therefore has heard it and we would know that he can hear. So if anyone says anything silly, if Ben destroys lights, you can't acknowledge that you have witnessed. Well, you could say that you saw it, but you wouldn't hear anyone laughing about it or whatnot because you would have to pretend you cannot do that. So use our language enrichment term, feigns that he is deaf and dumb, mute. Mentioned that he's been there the longest. Anyone recall about how long, roughly? We'll get back to it. What are other things that we know about him?
He's like a janitor, kind of.
Okay, and
Probably sweeping stuff.
somewhat by choice and somewhat maybe a little bit forced. The nice thing about him always at least cleaning is it probably makes it easier to pretend to do that stuff as opposed to sitting there in the room the whole time and looking. But we know, like nickname-wise, he's Chief Broom, since he's always cleaning. How about his background? He's Indian. He's half Indian, Colombian Indian. He's not from South America or anything like that. Anyone know the Columbia River location? Starts up in the Rocky Mountains in British Columbia and then comes down into Washington and Oregon. So they are in Oregon. The Columbia River main trading post for Native Americans is close to the Pacific. It's right on the border of Oregon and Washington. So he is basically a Northwest Native American. His mother is white. His father was the chief. So there's even some issues taking place with him so far as background. We're now making some assumptions here, but he's probably not going to be accepted, by pretty much either community as one of their own. So in his own right, he has some maybe issues, background issues that we'd be dealing with. But Native American, we know in high school he played football. We know after high school he went, I didn't hear what you said. We know two places where he would have gone. Carol? He was in the military, mentions the airfields and talks about them being foggy over in Europe. The assumption is going to be then what war was he involved in? The World War II. And we know that he also spent a year where? Because when he's in the library, he's looking at the magazines. He spent a year at some kind of college and was looking at the technical magazines and things like this. So he certainly does have a past to him. The book gets published in '62, probably taking place late 1950s. If he was in World War II, at least for a little bit, he's probably therefore been in the mental institution, the hospital, for around 15 years or so. and basically long enough that everyone thinks he's deaf and mute. So he's been doing this for at least a decade, more so probably 15 years or so. So military, he was in the Army, went to college, and he's probably been committed for approximately 15 years. So, whole bunch of stuff going on. Not that you're going to be medical diagnosis, doctors or anything like that. What would you say would be his main illness or issues that he'd be dealing with, Olivia? Schizophrenia, which I'm not going to spell right, so we're just going to stop right there. And I'd say another one for sure. This would kind of go along with the schizophrenia, but he is extremely paranoid. Which, if you kind of think about it, and who knows which came first, whether the paranoia or him faking being deaf and dumb, if you can't talk to anyone, you can't communicate, the only person who you kind of talk to is going to be yourself, so you're going to overanalyze everything, and if there's a way to kind of create more fear, it's probably going to be just overthinking absolutely everything. So schizophrenia, paranoia are probably going to be his two main chief, poor pun, issues that he is going to have to deal with. What's the rumor about him so far as the other patients also? And this would kind of contribute to those hallucinations and the fog that he's in. What's he dealt with more so than apparently any other patient on the ward? The EST, the electroshock therapy treatments, remember the number they throw around? They think he has had over, who knows how accurate it is, over 200 treatments of it. So Harding talks about when it was in vogue in the past and in the years that he has maybe had over 200 plus treatments. How accurate that is, who knows? If you leave things up to rumor, those numbers are probably going to grow and grow and grow and grow. But there's no reason to think that he at least has not had several treatments, in quotation marks for this. So with all that stuff going on, he tends to have some pretty interesting visions, dreams that are going to be taking place. And really, that's probably the first main big one that he ultimately has. Nicole, what do you remember from his dream?
He sees people watching from something up top and sees that whole guy get cut open.
Like the whole floor opens. You see a lot of machinery. Kind of like gears, things like that. There are people watching kind of like on a catwalk. There's this great big network of, I don't know how to describe it, but like mechanical stuff going on underneath the hospital. And then you see Blastic, who is the patient, gets ripped open, which really, and did not pair these, purposely. Yesterday we had the passage about pain. Jack made the terrible face when there was the whole idea about getting cut open from your stomach down to your thighs, and basically that's what's happening to Blastic. Do you remember what comes out from him? Because it's not organs, Rose. It's like rust and gears, so it's like robotic kind of aspects to him. Then the creepy thing, in some ways, is the next morning, what do we know about Blastic? He has died. So we're certainly going to be under the assumption that this is not what happened to him, but there is some things going on that he does ultimately die. So Blastic, we do know, is deceased. We don't really know necessarily what happened. Does he see him get rolled away, even though it kind of happens after the dream, and then this is the explanation that starts to take place? We don't know. And with Chief, there's going to be a whole bunch of instances where the honest answer is, we don't know. If he is schizophrenic, keep in mind he could have multiple versions of similar events kind of happening simultaneously. Part of him could see Blastic get rolled away, and then the other part could kind of go, ooh, this is how it happened because I'm paranoid. Ultimately, in his mind, what entity is going to be responsible for all of this stuff? And that's where we have the Combine. And then the question is, well, what's the combine? And we kind of have to go, what's the best way to describe the combine? Or what's at least a way to try to describe the combine? Because it's weird.
It's kind of just like general authority,
Okay.
the man.
The man, the establishment. For those of you that read 1984, it's kind of like the party, where it seems like omniscient, all-knowing. So general authority, omniscient, and really it kind of gets viewed as being what kind of object? Thoreau would agree with this. If you're calling it the establishment, the man, the government, it's a big machine taking place. And the best, going with that general authority being omniscient, the best term that we can probably use with it is the fact that it is going to be the government. So this is certainly a concept that we're going to kind of come back to multiple times. We don't ever really get true conclusion as to how he comes up with this idea, what it is, but certainly this would be the main fear that he kind of has, where you have, little GPS type devices implanted into people. He thinks, the broomsticks have and the mops have the radio transmitters and all that kind of stuff. Any possible fear that he has, it's always going to kind of basically go back to that all-encompassing omniscient power, which is going to be the combine. And so the dream certainly is going to be related back to that. Which comes first, we don't know, the dreams or this coming up with his solution, but everything simply does kind of come back to this authority kind of concept. What else? Things that you notice. Doesn't have to be related to this. We can build off it.
I was confused about the whole fog idea. Is that like something that's real? Is it like a medication, or is that just him giving up or whatever?
I'd say a little, not to give a terrible answer, probably all of the above. I think it's going to get induced by a variety of things. One of those that we already talked about. What's going your trip to the moon? Harding says it's a free trip to the moon. Once you go, you don't want to go back, but it's painless. It's the shock treatment. And so, you're getting electricity going through your skull. That's certainly going to leave you probably in some kind of foggy state. It might be partially induced by that. So it could end up being reaction to the EST. I think it could also be partially, what do they also get morning, noon, and night? Some of them peacefully take them. Some of them don't. We never really know what they are taking for some of them, but the medication. So that could kind of be putting him in a foggy kind of state. There's no substance, I guess, to really kind of support this, but mentioned, background, he's half white, half Native American. Compared to the other patients, and he is a chronic, he's not going anywhere. In some ways, it's possible that he could be a guinea pig. So who knows what kind of medication that guy has had. Some of it certainly could be medically based, some of it could be experimentally based. Wouldn't shock me if there's not, some kind of drugs, hallucinogens like LSD going through his system. In some ways, he likes the fog, because what can you do? It's a way to hide. But what's the negative aspect about the fog? Then you can't really, you get lost in it, you can't really see. There certainly be some connections with the fog where he makes reference back to the airfields. Back in Europe. He would be committed into the hospital shortly after World War II or towards the end of World War II. Is it some PTSD that is what brings him in? We don't know, but it might be something linked kind of with that. McMurphy and the fog end up having some strong correlations and relationships throughout the course of the book, and that's going to continue to unfold. Anyone recall when he feels like he actually does come out of the fog for a little while? action that he does. Hey, you're doing it. How about that? He wanted to take his reading check quiz. He raised his hand. He came out of the fog and does mention McMurphy pulls him out. The fear about being out of the fog, though, now is people see me, people notice me. And then you have the whole paranoia thing coming back again. Should I go clean the conference room? Because if I don't clean the conference room, then they'll know that they know that I can hear and talk. But if I do go, maybe they'll look at me funny. I don't know what to do. I'd rather kind of go back into the fog. So metaphorically speaking, it does seem that McMurphy might be the person who can kind of take him out. But if you are going to be out in the open, people are going to see you, and there could be some consequences, I guess, that kind of deal with that. But it certainly can be indicative of, or indicative, of his state of mind. It certainly can also get related to his overall, I guess, maybe confidence would be a way. But it's beneficial, but it can also be kind of dangerous and hurtful at the same time. But it certainly is going to be a motif that's going to kind of continue to come throughout. So one of the things to pay attention is, when is he feel like he's in the fog? When do things become much more clearer and lucid and whatnot, and start to see, all right, what things are going on? But it does seem that McMurphy would be someone who is able to kind of bring him out a little bit, possibly of his shell. But I don't want to say too much that might be spoiler alert coming forward. What else?
Is Nurse Ratched crazy or sick? I can't really tell.
Why do you think she might be crazy?
Because she has like nervous breakdowns a lot.
Okay.
It seems like
Do you-
she's just like, I don't know, she hires people that she knows would be really mean to the patients, and that she has like boss around, so it seems like she's got a lot of issues.
You can make a case for both. I would say certainly by what does she, I guess, kind of represent? Let's kind of step back, and then we might be able to answer it. Like, what kind of figure is she pretty much going to be throughout the course of the book?
She's like a dog complex.
Okay. So certainly in a figure of authority. I do think deep down she finds that she thinks she is being therapeutic. She is helping the patients in a therapeutic sort of way. I don't think that she, and you don't have to agree with me, but I don't think she knowingly or intentionally is trying to do harm to the patients. I do think she is doing what she feels to be is best. Anyone recall about how old she is? She's about 50 years old. So she certainly would maybe be like an old school way of thinking about things. She does use, or at least it gets alluded to that Harding mentioned, she does use EST kind of as a form of punishment and whatnot. So there's certainly, you could argue, some sadistic kind of qualities about her. But I do think that she tries to, at least in her mind, help them. Doesn't mean she is helping them. So she's certainly an authority figure. God complex. She gets referred to as, being a wolf. She is extremely, what kind of aggressive? What would be a word that we could put in front of it? She is the queen of being passive aggressive. She asks the questions that basically makes the patients feel bad about themselves, and no matter how you answer it, you're going to basically be incriminating yourself. Kaylee, she is the ultimate complex question, person. She would be very good at answering or asking those kinds of questions. So she's extremely passive aggressive. Aggressive has 2 G's. Stupid. Well,
She's really
not you, stupid. I was going to ask a stupid question, but
She's really controlling. Like, at one point, she slipped up and said, "You are under the jurisdiction of me," instead of us, and then she corrected herself.
and she also has power not only over the patients but also over
Staff.
the staff, the doctors. I mean, she is the queen bee. And she is, from a gender standpoint, and this was going to be my stupid question, she's a woman. Who are all her patients? Men. What does she do? It basically makes them feel non-manly. What happened to Roller upstairs in Disturbed? He doesn't squall anymore. How did he kill himself? He's sitting on the toilet. He castrates himself. I mean, what's the ultimate example of being emasculated? He, even though he's not under her jurisdiction, is completely emasculated to that point where he's going to castrate himself. She has the power to really kind of control all people. The complaint from a lot of readers is that Kesey is what? Towards women. I mean, there's not a female character in the book that's really easy to root for and go, yeah, she's made out to be evil. You have the other nurses who are basically minions of her. A lot of folks will look at it where Kesey's kind of creating an anti-feminist book. And that's certainly a valid argument to look at. You'll also certainly get the argument that it's not just women that he is being discriminatory against, but what other groups? I mean, who are her quote-unquote kind of evil henchmen? How are they referred to throughout the whole entire book? The Black Boys. I mean, they have names. You got Warren, Williams, Washington, Jeever are the main ones. There's also Mr. Turkle is the night watchman who kind of keeps Chief strapped in. But they are basically, static characters throughout the course of the book where they are meant to basically be kind of evil. So when you take a look at groups that Kesey seems to certainly not put in a positive light, you have women, you have African Americans. Rose, I didn't forget about your initial question. I'd say you also have a third group that you could argue Kesey is not putting in positive light. First period asked, why is Harding in the hospital? Like, what would his diagnosis be? I don't think it's going to be a medical diagnosis. I think part of it is an inferiority complex, but...
Say he was abusive.
Yeah, I mean, and you could tell there's certainly issues within that relationship when Vera comes in. I don't think it's just necessarily intellectuals, and in some points it's a little bit more subtle than others. I would say Harding is in there, and he is being represented as homosexual throughout the course of the book, and there's certainly homophobia that's going along with it. I mean, and it's 1960s where that aspect is kind of going to take place a little bit more. I would say that Kesey is not putting him in a positive light as well. Combine, we said, would be representative of, or at least seems to be, authority, all-knowing, the establishment. What would be like the G word for authority, establishment, government? When you think about government, what demographic tends to be in charge of the government? I heard mumbling, but I couldn't tell. Okay, but what would be the characteristics of? I would say up until our current president, this has been pretty much the standard demographic.
Caucasian males.
Yeah, old white guys, for the most part. So the authority figures that we have up here within the Combine. Nurse Ratched is not the ultimate authority, according to Chief. She's the authority on the ward, but who is the ultimate authority? The old white guys, the Combine. If you take a look then at who is doing kind of like the dirty deeds, it is the females, it's the blacks. So they're basically kind of being exploited by the combine. Who are victims of the combine? People who might not necessarily at that time culture fit into the standard. And also keep in mind, you got Chief, Native American, half white. He's certainly going to be within his own minority group. And that ends up kind of being the voice of the book against the combine. So there's certainly a lot of exploitation that would be taking place. Rose, she might be insane, possibly with the power, but would say she's kind of being used to take that role rather than her maybe wanting to be it herself or realizing it. Yeah.
Is she the one in your nurse or is the other nurse?
Yeah.
She behind the glass.
Yeah.
The other nurse is
She like
behind the
that,
glass
yeah.
because they're it's one of the therapy hours.
Yeah.
So he just kind of gets up to grab the oh, sorry, ma'am. I forgot about it.
So it's gonna be
Oh my god, how does my Twitter page?
Well, that's I mean, and that's pretty much where part two
Yeah,
ends.
yeah.
So she is certainly as shocking surprised as anyone else because
She
she
didn't
has kind of regained.
handle it. It's like she couldn't what happened.
She's regained authority at that point,
Yeah.
and now this is basically trying to break that authority. So we don't know where it's going to go.
I like it. It's just some things are confusing. I don't like how he's unreliable. Like you can't tell if
Oh, it makes everything strange.
Yeah, I don't like it.
It's nuts.
Not at all. I'm just gonna. The biggest details I remember from the book, like I remember all details.
Yeah, I actually read it.
See, I read 100 pages last night, so like I have like certain things from the story I remember. There's
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay, so
You're not. Here, let me close this
I
out.
was on page 8.
Need any